Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
Hello, this is the Ethics Experts. If it's your first time joining us, welcome. And if you are a returning subscriber, hello, bestie. Hope you're having an amazing day. See what happens when you subscribe to the Ethics Experts? You get a bonus greeting on every single episode. So hit that subscribe button. I'm here with my good friend, Pat Harned. How are you, Pat?
I'm doing good. Great to be here.
You run one of my favorite organizations that I've gotten to know over the last year. I think you guys are kind of at the cutting edge. I think the ethos of what you bring to the table in this battle that we're all kind of fighting shoulder to shoulder in is it's the right ethos. And I'm very excited to get the captain of this ship that I admire so much on here to kind of pick your brain.
Well, I have enjoyed our conversations. I think that means we can say we're besties, right? I'm really pleased to be here. So,
very good. So let's dive in. Like, how did you get at the helm, or how did you kind of grab the helm of this ship? What was that ascension like? I think it's a pretty interesting story that you have.
So I have long said if I ever write my autobiography, the title will be "I Never Meant for Any of This to Happen."
Great.
Yeah, I came to what was then the Ethics Resource Center in 1999. My background was in education. I was a character educator. And at the time, the organization wanted somebody to come in and help them develop a program reaching out to schools. So that was my role. I came in at the director level. I was there for maybe a year or two, and then I just got more and more involved in the business work of the organization and oversight of it. And long story short, I was at the VP level, and at the time, the president decided it was time to leave. And so I just went to the chairman of the board and said, I'd like a shot, make me interim president. And so it was partially born out of circumstance. It wasn't an expected departure by the president at the time, and no one knew what would happen. And I thought, I want to lead. I want to try. So that's how it happened.
The old battlefield promotion, but you raised your hand.
Exactly.
Where did that confidence come from? And how long were you in there, before you created that opportunity for yourself?
I was frightfully shy as a child. In fact, I was frightfully shy until well after grad school. So to be honest with you, I think I learned it along the way in different jobs, different careers that I had. If you ask my mom, though, she would say, I've been an entrepreneurial type person all along, but I'm not so sure I agree with that. But I definitely, being at this organization, seeing what it does, what its potential is, I am a strategic thinker, and I've always thought that the center could be doing so much in the world. So when the opportunity came and the crisis came, it was just sort of second nature to say, this is my time and I'd like to step forward and lead. So I don't know how much of it was none of it was really planned. It was sort of born out of circumstance.
Was it kind of like, who better than me at this point? Or like you felt like it was more like your duty to kind of, step up into that role?
I think it was a little bit of feeling that somebody needed to do it. And I felt like I of course was the number 2 in the organization at the time. And I thought I should probably do it. But I knew I had worked in nonprofits most of my career. I had learned everything about what the organization did. And so I really felt like I'm the right person to do this. So yeah, I did think, here I am. I'd like to do it. I'd like to have a shot.
I think your mom's right about you. So how long was that from when you first stepped in the door and it was the Compliance Resource Center to now it becoming ECI and you taking that step?
I had been there for 6 years when I became interim president, did that for a year, then said to the board, I put a strategic plan in front of them and said, this is where I think we need to go. But if you want to buy into it, I think I should have the job permanently.
Yeah.
And we were the Ethics Resource Center then at the time. So it wasn't until 2014 that we actually aligned with the Ethics and Compliance Association to become ECI as it is known today. But I've essentially been leading since 2004, took on the association in 2014, and that's how we are where we are today.
And what was that? What was that like when you guys kind of joined forces? Like, what was the impetus for that? What was the catalyst? And I'd love to kind of dive into what that marriage turned into, because that's always such a difficult thing, putting two organizations together and, setting a strategic direction that can encompass, all the resources that are within these two entities.
Mm-hmm. So one thing to know about ECI, actually next year is our centennial anniversary.
Wow.
It's amazing, the history of this organization. And in a lot of ways, the things that we have done over time and the way we have grown are a reflection of what's happened in the business world and in the ethics and compliance profession. So at the time that we were creating the strategic alliance for both of the two nonprofits, ERC doing research, ECOA at the time, not just as a member association, the industry had exploded. There were tons of organizations that were providing different resources and trying to get people in our profession to be a community. So we were both up against, how do we continue to stay relevant? How do we continue to add value? How do we continue to be thought leaders as nonprofits? Mm-hmm. And at the time, the then executive director of the association announced his retirement. And our thinking was, we're far better together because we take the research and the resources of the ERC and we make them available to the members of the ECA. And then we mine the insights and the needs and the risk of the members to inform the research and the resources. So it was a mutual agreement by both organizations that together we could do something that was not being done in our profession. So we went through all the processes that happen when you merge two companies. And I remember saying often during that process, I have a whole new appreciation for mergers and acquisitions. Yeah. I mean, we were 22 staff members, 11 in each organization, 2 different cities, 2 different boards. And had to go through all the changes, dismantling or redoing financial systems and communication systems, deciding whose health insurance are you keeping, right. Blending 2 very different cultures of staff. And then at a leadership and governance level, trying to get 2 boards to agree how they were going. We still actually maintain the 2 separate boards because we maintain the 2 separate organizations.
Was that just initially? That was just initially?
And that's actually to this day. And it's because it's their tax status. One is a charity, the other is a professional association, and we can't technically merge them. So we align them in a strategic alliance and maintain the 2 boards. So it was kind of a hybrid of how do we back, front of the house, it's one organization, and it's also behind the scenes, one staff administering 2 organizations. Very complex.
Totally.
So yeah, it was quite an educational experience for me.
So there was at one point in time when you were a VP and you're kind of looking out over this landscape, and you have some vision for like what this thing could be. And I think, we are in a very unique industry. There's a lot of unique things. There's, you use this word community. I think it is actually a community, and it's a very unique thing that a lot of people who have kind of, been steeped in this pool for so long, they sometimes don't appreciate it. How close are we as a community, so to speak, to the vision that you had, and what has that path toward this growing and exploding into something that's really meaningful and really making a big impact on our workplaces and on our world been like?
That's a really great question. I think as a profession, we've waxed and waned in that original vision. I remember when I was taking the helm, it was right at the time that Enron had happened, Sarbanes-Oxley was being passed. The world was sort of reeling about all this misconduct in business. And I remember thinking first of all, the strength of our organization was research and metrics, being able to quantitatively show that a focus on values and culture actually changes behavior and reduces risk of of noncompliance in an organization. So my vision was, let's use research to argue to business leaders that they can radically transform their organizations if they focus in the right way and challenge their employees to live out their values on a daily basis. And it could change the business environment. I think the challenges for the profession, there have been a lot of organizations that have caught that vision that are really good at doing that. But we also have had various points in time where there have been enforcement surges and regulatory changes and things that have happened that I want to be careful in saying this in a way, it's not a distraction, but it diverts attention. It diverts the focus and the conversation of our profession. So for example, the FCPA surges, we were all we talked about was FCPA. Right. And it's not that that wasn't important, but it also wasn't FCPA in the context of what are we trying to accomplish with a good ethics and compliance program? Or how do we encourage our employees to speak up and raise concerns? And if anything, I actually am more optimistic now about where our profession can go than I have been in all the years I've been in this profession. And it's because of the growing ESG movement and where I think that's could go, provided our profession takes a role in it. So, I think the focus outside of companies by investors, by and increasingly regulators, the interest of the next generation of employees in working for companies that do good in the world and have values, is putting new pressure on businesses to make sure that they have internally, they've got their house in order, they have values, they have a strong culture, they have people who raise concerns, and potentially outside of the company, they're taking on issues that are in alignment with their values, and they are focusing on doing good in the world in a way that makes sense for their business proposition. So we didn't have that before.
Yeah, I think it's interesting if you sort of juxtapose the FCPA thing with the ESG thing, because it's almost like one is a little bit more myopic, or it's focusing on a single facet of what the sort of multidimensional shape that our profession can be. Whereas the latter is sort of almost an unleashing of it, or it's almost like provides like a really unique opportunity, to your point, to really manifest as this strategic thing in our organization to translate these ethical, behaviors, to your point, into better impact on all the stakeholders that sort of touch and are affected by an organization. What do you think? So do you think I'm right?
I do agree completely.
So what do you think? The odd thing is I was at this conference recently, and you could feel, as we're talking about ESG, you could feel this like undercurrent of like anxiety in the room because people don't know where to start. What do you think that is? And what do you think stops us from seeing the opportunity that I think is like very apparent with this whole thing?
I think part of it is that right now, for where we are with the whole internally in a business, I'm not sure companies know yet what to do with all this ESG stuff. And so the ethics and compliance officer, they're starting to get called into conversations in their business where they're talking about, what are we going to do? We need to have a committee. We need you to be a part of it. I do think it's still the unknown what that's going to look like in a company. And so I wonder if that isn't part of the hesitation that we're seeing in our profession. It's not something in the traditional ethics and compliance program and the way practitioners tend to look at what their job is. Such a huge emphasis has been on risk, has been on compliance, less so sort of values and extension of that into corporate purpose and corporate mission. It's just not our first thought as a profession. It's my first thought as I think about, what are we doing? And what is ECI trying to promote? And I think there is a growing portion of our community that does think that way. But I think that the connection isn't quite clear for a lot of professionals yet, what ESG is going to do for their function, other than they're going to have some responsibility for making sure they're in compliance with any kind of ESG commitments or disclosures that are made. And I think that's shortchanging both what ESG could be, and it is wildly shortchanging the impact that the ethics and compliance profession could have if we embraced and even became thought leaders in the dialogue about ESG. Why are we doing it and what is its potential?
There's this interesting, so 100%, I wish you could just say that again and we can put that on a billboard or something. But it's kind of interesting if you think about it, because at some point, these functions and these titles didn't exist in our organization, and these regulations were coming out, and somebody smart was saying to someone else smart, hey, I need, you seem capable, you have agency, can you kind of figure this thing out? And over time, got in, you roll up your sleeves, you figure out how this regulation overlays on the organization and which pieces are important and which pieces are immaterial and whatever. And in that chaos, this profession emerged. There's so many of those same notes playing in this ESG song, and yet it's almost like the uncertainty of it is creating anxiety for folks to where they're almost blinded to the opportunity. And maybe I'm being a little like heavy-handed with it, but that's like the feel that I get from a lot of people, and it's kind of baffling.
My observation, this is how long I've been in this profession. I remember when there were not many people who actually had a title for having the ethics and compliance role. It was just sort of, we need to have a value statement. Can you take charge of it? And so I was early enough in the profession that I saw it really grow. It took Sarbanes-Oxley for the ethics and compliance profession to really explode. I wonder. And now, you can mark our profession by the passage of certain regulations or the issuance of certain guidance documents, the most recent of which I think has been the DOJ's guidance around ethics and compliance programs. And in a way, I wonder if as a profession, we've kind of become so used to waiting for a regulation to arrive that then gives legitimacy to our doing some things. And we all know the SEC is considering disclosure rules around at least the E part of it, ESG, if not ESG as whole. And I suspect there's a little bit of let's wait and see what's going to happen so that then companies figure out how do we staff it and what does it look like and who's in charge. But again, I think we can do that as a profession. But if you ask me, the promise and the potential of an ethics and compliance officer, that function in a company, it really should be and could be the people who are not only the safeguarding the values of the organization, but they're challenging leadership to really embrace it and live by it and promote it and advance it in everything that they do in their operations. And so I guess my concern is if we sit back long enough and we wait to see where's ESG going to go and what's the regulation going to be and what will be the function and who will be in charge, it's going to be somebody else. And ethics and compliance will be reporting to whoever is in charge of that. That's the world according to Pat, not necessarily based on any kind of research, but a lot of years in the field, just sort of seeing how as a profession, we tend to think we are by nature driven by law, regulation, and in a way that makes you less apt to just say, okay, this is a huge possibility for our company to really change the way we think and change the way we operate and actually be able to demonstrate our impact and attract new employees who are buying into our vision and our mission. It's just not we've not thought that way yet as a profession, and I'm hoping we start to.
Yeah. So there's so many things I want to say because I think you're so spot on. And so let me start here. You're somebody that's clearly very intelligent, very smart, very driven, but you also seem like somebody who's very intuitive, and you can see sort of the writing on the wall. How has that balance, that yin and yang in you, kind of served you well, and how have you kind of been able to, kind of ride both of those horses at the same time?
So in terms of my role as a leader and what I do for ECI, I think the way I am wired, And frankly, I have a PhD in the philosophy of education, and I focused on how organizations influence people's sense of ethics and their growth in their character development.
Oh.
So I read a lot of philosophy, and I think that has affected me too, in good ways and bad ways. But I think on the one hand, the way I'm wired makes me think about the possibilities, and also I'm very much, I know enough about how organizations affect people that it helps to translate into the guidance I give our staff and our researchers around how they can be looking at different issues that are happening in our profession. So I think those are good things. I think on another level, though, it is, ours is a profession of very specific, careful, sometimes checking the box kind of, very risk-oriented professionals. And while I totally appreciate that that's an essential part of an ethics and compliance program, I sometimes find myself wondering, would I be thinking the way I do if I had come from the legal field, for example, or from the risk area? Probably not. So a lot of how I think is the result of my background coming into the business world.
Yeah, that, everyone's always talking about the philosopher king, but no one's talking about the philosopher queen.
I haven't even thought about that.
Well, now let's start thinking about it. But it is a really interesting kind of background that you bring to it, because you have this entrepreneurial thing that, tell your mom I agree. And
Okay.
You have this sort of this philosophical angle, and you see this interplay, and you see this opportunity that ethics can play in an organization. And I tell this story a lot of, at some point, IT was not a strategic lever in a company. It's 1996, and the board is full of white hairs who think that the internet's just going to replace the fax machine. And
Right.
now, fast forward to the pandemic, no one's shutting their website off or shutting off their co-location facility or shutting off the cloud to tighten the belt. This is a strategic thing that cannot move. That path has been forged by another department, IT, for example. And that's a path that we can follow, particularly in this knowledge work economy that we're in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me a little bit about how you've seen this overlap or this sort of vestigial structure from the Industrial Revolution kind of begin to be shed away. And I don't know if it's a generational change that's happening that's making this ESG kind of really, I'm just using that as shorthand for like the opportunity that I think is kind of in front of us that we've been sort of talking around. Talk to me about how you've seen that begin to kind of shed away, and how you've seen folks kind of accelerate through that to make that sort of values forward impact in their organization to, activate their workforce and things like that. Because that's really kind of the game that I think is going to turn the light bulbs on at the top, to the extent that the top cares about profit and how that translates into sort of more discretionary effort or something.
What makes the ESG movement so different, at least the way I have been seeing it and reading about it and thinking about it, is that maybe not, somebody could probably argue this isn't the first time, but in my view, it probably is one of the first times. We've seen the influence coming from stakeholders who are not regulators necessarily, the impetus for it. Mm-hmm. And it is an expectation of businesses to not just address the needs of their stakeholders, but to also address social issues that are well beyond things that I think they'd ever thought about before. Right. And so to your example about nobody really would have worried as much about IT 10, 15 years ago as we do now, I don't think, when I think back 10, 15 years where we were as a profession, we were worried about internal controls and signing financial statements to comply with Sarbanes-Oxley, or we were worried about, again, FCPA or enforcement practices. It was not much of a conversation. Every now and then sort of a, wouldn't it, why do the new generation of employees coming in, why do they act so differently? And we might spend a session at a conference talking about it. Now, I think what we're seeing is that employees who are coming into the workplace are changing the culture of the workplace. They're changing the way they want to work. Now, the news this week is all about how many people are quitting their jobs not necessarily because of the pandemic, but the pandemic has made them rethink what's important to them and how do they want to make a difference in the world and what is the profession that's going to be most meaningful to them. Meanwhile, we've got climate issues and we've got social issues and people who, there's poverty in the world, all kinds of issues that we're increasingly looking to business to be a part of the solution for, and not just looking to them, we're expecting it and we're evaluating them based on what they're doing. So the stakes are really high now for business. You're going to lose your employees, you're going to lose your investors, you're going to have media issues, you're going to have regulatory issues, international issues. If you're not willing to think about beyond just the bottom line, what kind of a difference are we making? So in that sense, it is almost like a new industrial revolution in the pressure and the change in worldview that is now expected of businesses. And the question is how they're going to react to it, how they're going to actually take the mantle, so to speak. So some companies will just create a function, do the disclosures, hope for the best, lawyer up, do what they need to do. Others, I think, will be on the front edge of it and really thinking about how do we translate this into a much deeper and bigger purpose for our company. And that has huge potential. And I think there will be rewards in terms of revenue for those companies if they're able to do it.
100%. I mean, it's like there's a new currency in the game, and it's this intangible currency, and you can't put it on a balance sheet. And it's sort of, based on that gap between the sort of stated purpose of an organization and what the people inside the organization or what the people thinking about investing in that organization actually feel, and how crippling it can be when that gap erupts, or when you see that it's just some, for lack of a better term, some like greenwashing in the mix. Talk to me about 10 years from now, how do you see things kind of separating out and coagulating, I guess, around these issues from an authenticity and actual execution standpoint?
Well, I think as the generations that have been leading companies start to retire out, some of them are now, but as they continue to move into the next phase of their lives, as the next generations are rising up into leadership, but also importantly, as the next generation of investors have more of an economic influence in the business world, I think that's going to be a game changer in how companies are thinking and leading and how investors are, where they're putting their money. And that those are things that move the needle for a lot of companies. I do think right now, one of the challenges we're up against is that while ESG investing has been really influential, there is still a very large portion of the investor community that is more old school. And there is, even if you look at the Business Roundtable and their revision to the purpose of a corporation, it was brilliantly done, very well thought out, not embraced 100% by the business world, because there's just very big differences. And I suspect a lot of it is generational, but in how we think about what our business is supposed to be doing. So I expect that's going to change a fair amount. One thing I hope will change is that there's still very much of a perception, some of it is earned, but there's a perception that big business is always bad, that business is corporations are the enemy. And some of that is well-deserved by companies. But I hope that especially if companies are embracing their social responsibility, their governance responsibilities, their environmental responsibilities, that will also change stakeholders' perceptions of them and their intent and their purpose.
I think that's right. I think that's pretty spot on. And I think that just, again, speaks to the opportunity to become more resonant, become more authentic, to really embrace this new way of doing things. But that rub, whether it's generational or whether it's just the jadedness or the cynicism that resides in some folks who point to, the CSR thing and say this is just a new CSR. Actually, let's dive into that from your standpoint, because you've been through and you've seen a lot of those things. When corporate social responsibility came out, and that was the 3-letter acronym that diverted some attention from perhaps whatever else you guys were focused on. How do you feel like this is different than that? And how do you feel like, it seems like you think this may have sort of more legs or more sort of staying power as we move forward. What do you think that difference is?
I mean, I think that ESG is very much in alignment with CSR, the traditional CSR. I do remember when CSR was rising up in the business world, the E&C profession existed, but there was also we had a lot of conversations about, is CSR going to overtake E&C? Kind of similar things that we talk about now with respect to what's going to happen with ESG, and is it going to make us obsolete, or are we going to end up not being as important? I think the big difference, though, between CSR of the past and ESG now, which is what we've been talking about, that there is so much interest in ESG from outside the organization, or in Europe, the emphasis on human rights. It's not necessarily the ESG proper term, but and climate change and social issues. I think the fact that there is momentum outside a company among stakeholders, and frankly, a lot of interest by internal stakeholders, that's going to make it different. CSR, I think somehow, this might be overstating it, but and I apologize to CSR professionals who may be listening, but it's at some point it became more like, what are we doing with the foundation? How are we making sure that where we're contributing funds and giving time and energy and resources, we're doing good with it? And that was good. It's important because corporate social responsibility is an important thing, but it seems like ESG is a lot different. It's about, from your governance throughout the organization, are you actually mindful in the business decisions you're making about the impact that you have? And are you taking steps to correct anything you're doing that's doing harm in the world in order to do good in the world?
Yeah, it's like, if one's a square, this is a cube or something. It's got some more sort of weight to it. It's got some more, I don't know. And I think it's a little bit more kind of applicable across industries because you can, I don't know if mix and match is the right word, but your unique business perhaps can sort of fill in more of those cracks or more of those aspects of the shape. So let me ask you this. Let me kind of rant and rave a little bit. I just love all the studies you guys put out. There's this really interesting one that you guys put out this year, the state of I'm going to butcher it, but it's like the state of the workplace. And there's something that I really honed in on, which was the rise in retaliation. So switching gears a little bit.
Yep.
So in 2017, this is approximately right. In 2017, I think it was 44% of folks who spoke up experienced some form of actual retaliation. And over the 3 years, I think you guys put it out this year, that was up to 79%. That effectively doubled. What do you think is going on there?
A couple things. One is that more people are coming forward to report, which is great. I mean, that was the good news that was related to that. And to me, that's a reflection of the fact that more companies are doing a better job of talking to their employees about the importance of reporting and making channels available to them and encouraging people to make use of those things. So more people are coming forward, but unfortunately, the thing that has also been true, and it has always been true, is that the more you have people reporting, the more likely you are to have people experiencing retaliation for it. So I think that's a big factor. The other thing is, I think people in general, employees, are a whole lot smarter about what kind of actions constitute retaliation. And so it's also possible that as we're asking these questions year over year, we're asking them of an employee population that is smarter and smarter and smarter about, wow, I came forward and raised a concern and the behavior that happened actually was retaliation. So it's probably both of those things. Neither of, employees' education about it is a good thing, but the fact that retaliation comes with more willingness to come forward is a bad thing.
That's an interesting angle. I hadn't really thought about it from that perspective. I think there's a lot of opportunity in it, right? To knock that down or, to talk about the elephant in the room. We've talked about this with a lot of folks that we work with. Like there's probably, if 80% on average are experiencing it, there's probably some kind of retaliation issue in your company. And if it's not actually there, at least the fear of it is absolutely there. So you can attack that head on to try to get people to speak up and really kind of bring that thing forward, because crowdsourcing of risk management, closing that gap between the aspirational culture and the actual culture that people live out, there's just so much discretionary effort that, if you want to nerd out on econ for a minute, that translates into reduction of dead weight loss, translates into more profitability. I mean, whatever, all the things that, the board cares about. So I just love the research you guys do. I love, to a person that I've met in your organization, I think you have a great team. I think you've built a really phenomenal organization, and I love the impact that you guys continue to make on our community to help people, escalate and elevate from, cost center, that derogatory term that a lot of folks are kind of plagued with, to this strategic lever that I think we can all be in our organizations when we're truly actualized. 2 quick questions. I want to be conscious of time here. If you could go back in time to a young Pat and give her some advice that you wish you had, what would that be?
So to a very young Pat, I think I would advise me to not be so afraid. I think it took me far too long to figure out how to come out of my very, very, very introverted shell. Speaking of my mother, she could tell some pretty tragic stories of just how shy I was. But I think as I came into the ethics and compliance profession, I think an important realization I had coming from the education world is that what businesses at the end of the day are trying to do is to create environments where good people come to work and make good decisions. And I wish I had been bolder earlier on in just conveying that message, that it's not really the job of a business to teach people what right and wrong is. They already know it.
Right.
It's really the job of a business to respect the people coming in, to give them an environment where they can thrive, to give them ways to raise concerns safely. And so I think my learning curve to get to that pithy message was a little bit long. And I suppose I would advise myself to have been bolder in talking about that and thinking it through sooner.
Do you think if a young you met an older you, that you would believe you?
No, definitely not.
That's the paradox of this question all the time. You know what I'm saying?
I know.
Because I probably wouldn't trust me then. I don't know. Anyways, last question as we wrap up. Most overrated philosopher, most underrated philosopher?
Oh, wow. So I'm sitting in between 2 philosophers on my shelf. We were talking about that before we started recording. So in the character development world, in the, ethics world, trying to think, Socrates, I suppose, the Socratic method, especially in teaching, assuming people are going to arrive at good conclusions. I'm not so sure that's the most effective way to actually be educating people. Most underrated.
You can say Yoda,
I was going to say Yoda.
well, then, you know what? On that, let's end on that. The most underrated. Very good. This is really
actually, some of the best lines, some of the best philosophy, I think, have come from some of the, movies like Lord of the Rings and, amazing one-liners that are just really thoughtful little snippets of philosophy. So
yeah, it's all out there. If you tune into it, there's really philosophy all around us. There's a lot we can
There really is.
Well, we could talk for another hour, I'm sure, but this was really a blast. I appreciate you joining us on the Ethics Experts, everyone. Until next time.